The NFL season is quickly approaching, and it will be a season unlike any of the previous 100. Joining us to preview this very unusual 2020 year and other items of interest, longtime NFL reporter Steve Wyche of NFL Network. Steve, we certainly appreciate your time. I want to start off by asking for your top three most intriguing storylines for this upcoming year.
Well, Anthony, you mentioned it, how this is a season like no other because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's not going to be fans in a lot of stadiums. Those that will have fans will probably be at 15 to 20% capacity, at least to start things out. But the big question is, will the NFL be able to play all 16 games in its 17-week season? Will there be an outbreak? And if so, can it be controlled? That, of course, is a big question. Another big question is, can the Kansas City Chiefs repeat as Super Bowl champions? Their quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, the MVP, signed a $450 million contract, but we know how hard it is to get back to the big game. And another story I'm keeping my eye on is what's going to happen in Washington. Yes, we know they just hired the first black team president, but this is a team that's really going through a lot of turmoil. We've had the name change. We've had some allegations of mistreatment of women in the workplace, and that continue to compound. Just to see exactly how the league is going to handle some of these issues with Washington is going to be very intriguing. And their head coach, Ron Rivera, a wonderful man, just took the job. He's going to be in charge of cleaning some of this up, and we just come to find out he also just had a cancer diagnosis. Seems like it's treatable, but this is going to be a big mountain and a huge story that's going to have some legs for a while in Washington.
And I'm going to ask you more about Washington in a moment. You mentioned some teams have stated they will allow a small percentage of fans to attend games. Many others have said they will not open their gates, at least initially. How are the players and the coaches that you've talked to handled something that was unimaginable when the Chiefs walked off that field in Miami as Super Bowl champs in February?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. Most teams have handled it because there has been a standard offseason of kind of a competitive balance issue in terms of everybody could start training camp at the same time. You had to go through all of these testing protocols. Everyone had to kind of practice the same days and regimen and things like that. But now that you're hearing that some stadiums will have some fans in it, some people are saying, you had the Bills head coach Sean McDermott was like, how can some stadiums not have fans to start the season while others can? Isn't that inequity? But a lot of these decisions are being made by the local health commissioners where these teams are playing, not so much the team or the league itself. So it'll just be interesting to see how this plays out. But playing in empty stadiums, a lot of the players are like, this is the worst. It's different. It's something we're going to have to get used to. But we've seen NBA players, Premier League soccer, a lot of other sports get used to it, and I think the NFL players will get used to it once they kind of cross that threshold.
You can follow Steve on Twitter at Wyche89 and on NFL Network's Inside Training Camp live each morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll have part two of our conversation with Steve later this week. Yesterday, we gave you part one of our conversation with NFL Network's Steve Wyche, and one of his big storylines going into this season is Kansas City and whether or not the Chiefs will repeat as champions. In part two, we discuss a number of topics, including the importance of this man, 2021 Pro Football Hall of Fame finalist, the late former Pittsburgh Steelers scout and executive Bill Nunn.
Yeah, look, Bill Nunn, he was a writer for the black newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier, for years, and they would always come out with the Black College All-American team. And he would help these teams like the Steelers discover some of these great players, like the Donnie Shells of the world, like some of these great, the Steelers were one of the first teams to just load up their roster. Mel Blount, there's so many with players from historically black colleges and HBCU, so they eventually hired him as a scout, and he created a pipeline of that black college talent into the Steelers, and that really led to that dynasty they had in the 70s with their four Super Bowls that they won in that decade. And this also really spurred other organizations to start mining the talent at HBCUs, like the Dallas Cowboys, like the Houston Oilers, which are now the Tennessee Titans. So Bill Nunn should have been in the Pro Football Hall of Fame years ago. I mean, what he did helped really tilt the scales to make the Pittsburgh Steelers one of the keystone franchises of the NFL. He is already in the Black College Football Hall of Fame. But again, he's so deserving, and it's about time.
You're a Howard University alum. You used to write for the Washington Post. You know how much the NFL franchise there means to DC and the DMV. You mentioned the Washington football team earlier. the major changes that franchise has undergone this summer, most recently naming Jason Wright as the first black team president in league history. We understand the significance of the hire, but what does it indicate to you?
Well, we'll see. I mean, look, is it just a token hire? Or is it something where, because of his credentials, because Jason Wright seems very, very, he's a longtime businessman. He worked for a huge consulting firm in D.C. Actually helped a couple cities figure out how to manage the COVID case. Former NFL player, incredibly sharp, Northwestern grad, just comes with significant credentials. But are they going to give him the power to do what team presidents do? Now, he's got nothing to do with the football side. His big task at hand is going to be trying to get a new stadium within the city. That's the first choice, but will it be in Virginia, Maryland, in the city? He's got to figure that out. But also cleaning up some of the mess that has gone on in Washington. Again, as I mentioned, there was a lot of accusations of workplace management towards women, harassment. It continues to expand. He's got to clean that up. Jason is the first black team president ever in NFL history. If they give them the opportunity to do his thing and he succeeds, that could crack the door open for so many others, because team presidents are the ones who sit to the right of the owner and really help make a lot of very influential decisions.
You can follow Steve on Twitter at Wyche89 and on NFL Network's Inside Training Camp live each morning starting at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll have part 3 of our conversation with Steve tomorrow on BNC Prime. 50 years ago today, Vince Lombardi died of cancer. The man for whom the Super Bowl trophy is named is not only on the very short list of greatest coaches of all time and a 5-time champion, but he was also a champion for equal rights. Lombardi fielded numerous HBCU alums on his teams, and in the last part of my conversation with NFL Network Steve Wyche, we discuss how important the Black College Football Hall of Fame is.
First off, roughly 10% of the Pro Football Hall of Fame are the players who came from historically black colleges and universities. And then you think about all the great coaches, the Eddie Robinsons of the world, the big John Merritts of the world, who coached a lot of these players who became great players and coaches. Just that influence. The event itself, it just recognizes so much of the great history. And it's such a great collection of talent, like Harold Carmichael. I mentioned Mel Blount, Doug Williams, James Harris. You go there, and it is a collection of American history, not just black American history, but American history in that room. And it is so powerful and so moving. And it's just something, if you come to understand the importance of it, which so many people are starting to, I'm just so glad that Doug Williams and James Harris established this. And over the next couple of years, we're actually going to be putting a museum at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. There's a temporary museum right now, but they have committed to building a permanent home for the museum itself, for the Black College Football Hall of Fame in Canton, which every year gets more than 900,000 visitors. So a lot of people who may not know anything about Jackson State or Mississippi Valley State, while they're going there to see their great NFL heroes, they can learn a little bit about the HBCUs and their importance to not only football but American history.
I mentioned that you are a Howard University alum. It's been a very big year for you guys, culminating with the nomination of HU alumna Kamala Harris as the Democratic vice presidential candidate. Give us a sense of the pride that Howard alums everywhere are feeling at this point in time.
Are you giving me more of a platform to brag? People are already sick of Howard folks always talking about how great Howard is, from homecoming to everything else. But yeah, it's been a big year. And, Kamala Harris, this is, of course, great. Anybody would be proud to have one of their alums being possibly up for such a great office as the vice president, but as the first black woman, just so many historical implications here. And of course, she's qualified. I live in California. I know how fantastic of a senator that she has been here. But just some of the other things that have happened at Howard. McCord Maker, one of the top high school basketball players in the country, he spurned Memphis and Kentucky and UCLA and all these Power 5 programs, decided to come to Howard. So, that's kind of opening up a window saying, hey, maybe more players who are these great high school blue chip recruits will come to HBCUs to recognize you can get a quality education. And you can also play the sport where the pro scouts are going to find you. We at Howard, the only thing that's really been disappointing for us this year is we won't be able to have the best homecoming in the country because of the pandemic.
Oh, there you go. Well, full disclosure, I grew up 10 minutes from Howard. born and raised in D.C., but I went to Hampton, so I'm a Hampton man. So we're natural rivals, you and I. But I will give you all your due.
My parents are Hamptonians. My parents are Hamptonians, so you're all good with me, Anthony.
There you go. All right, Steve Wyche of NFL Network. Great follow on Twitter, so please follow him at Wyche89, and each day at 10 a.m. Eastern on Inside Training Camp Live. All right, thanks again to Steve Wyche of NFL Network. Some final